Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Imagine if we took these words to heart, unsalved ourselves and took another's part, silenced the accuser, dropped the grudge. Do not condemn, you will not be condemned. Imagine if we lived our lives from this and met each other's outcasts face to face. Imagine if the blood-dimmed tide was stemmed. Forgive, and you yourselves will be forgiven. What if we walked together on this path? What if the whole world laid aside its wrath and things were done on earth as though in heaven, as though the heart's dark knots were all undone, as though this dreamer weren't the only one? One of the things I most like to hear people say when they talk about poetry with me is, oh, I didn't think I liked poetry, but I liked yours. You know, it's very nice. And I think actually there's a larger number of people now than there would have been, say, in the 19th century, who say they don't get poetry, or say poetry's not for them. Eliot's remark in various essays in the mid-20th century that he was addressing, in order to be authentic, had to be difficult, led to the unfortunate conclusion that if it's difficult, it must be poetry. One of the things that was lost was a kind of lucidity and music and beauty in the line. We need to find a way of writing which reaches in to the imagination before the reason has to kind of spend 5 minutes on Wikipedia checking out the references. I think poetry at its best is the exact opposite of abstraction. It's a resistance to the tendency to use abstract language which is disembodied and has no kind of purchase on things. It isn't going to be a successful poem unless it is precisely embodied in the terms and in the ways that people can see.
Let's welcome Dr. Malcolm Guite.
I had a moment of sort of revelation in the late 70s about the nature of form, sitting at the feet of a great poet, Geoffrey Hill. He gave a stunning lecture on Blake. He quoted a Blake letter about when Blake was quite a young man and was learning the art of engraving. And Blake said that the most important line was what, and I quote, was the bounding line. It's an odd word to choose, bounding, because he could have said binding, obviously it binds things in, or he could have said boundary, but he chose bounding. And Geoffrey Hill pointed out that bounding is one of that little set of English words that mean two exact opposite things. Bounding in, but also bounding about, grace abounding, bounding with energy. And he said that it was the very choice of the bounding form that, far from delimiting or truncating, you know, some glorious free spirit, it's much more like the walls of a furnace, you know, that frame and concentrate and intensify the heat of the flame. There are two lines I wrote in the Advent antiphon sonnets that directly relate to this question of form and the transcendence of form in life as well as poetry. In the first one, O Sapientia, I have the line, my maker's bounding line defining me, carefully riffing on the Blake, it's bounding line. The final line of O Oriens, O Dayspring, is, beyond your long last line, the dawn is breaking. And there's a last line, but there's a dawn. There's form and there's transcendence of form, but if you want to have the transcendence, you need the form, which is why we believe in death and resurrection. We don't believe in some vague continuity. Death is a very real thing. We become a new thing through having passed through death. So there has to be the end, the bounding line, in order for the resurrection to be the thing that it is. And shocking and difficult and terrible as that is, God goes into the shock and the difficulty and the terror with us.